Right, so this is going to be my new training series called 10-6 Diaries. So the idea is I want to achieve a 10-6 this season, so 1069 is the goal, and I'm going to sort of like document my process to doing that through here. So the first episode will just be like off-season training, off-season prep. So I've got sort of 20 weeks of training in this video. I've just sort of like taken clips and not sort of like showing the whole thing because it would be way too long if I did that. So I guess I will start where I finished off last time, which was I just ran my first sub-11 race, and then I was competing at the Scottish Championships 13 days after that. So talk about the Scottish Championships. So I wanted to make the finals. I failed to achieve that goal. I ran 11.04, which was good enough for 10th place. But I sort of messed the taper up going into this really bad because I'd ran that sub-11 race and I had like a 3-day taper initially going into that. So I essentially had like a 2.5-week taper going into the Scottish Championships, which just, didn't work. And like looking back at it was a really dumb decision on my part, but I guess that's sort of like part of the journey, is like learning a lot from your mistakes. But yeah, I was like really sore after running the sub-11, so I sort of had 4 easy days of like training, just like trying to recover. And then like after that there was like 9 days out from the Scottish, and that's when I'd ran the taper. So as I say, essentially a 2.5-week taper, which just, it just doesn't work, and I just didn't really have the fitness. I do believe that I could have ran like 10.8 mid to possibly 10.7 high, but that's very speculative because obviously I didn't do that and I messed the taper up. But as I say, it is what it is. I learnt my lesson, and that's sort of like the main thing. So then 2 days after the Scottish, I just got straight into my off season. So the Scottish was on the Saturday, I had the Sunday as a day off. I just went into work after that. I think I worked like a 7-hour shift, and then I just got straight into the off season. So we started off really general with like heavy sled work. It was JB Moran inspired, 50% of body mass, which I think his research shows that it's best for like peak power and developing early acceleration technique. So I think that was sort of the reasoning for that, and it was just to sort of get away from the sort of specific element of sprinting, that upfight sort of stuff, and just do really sort of general stuff. And that was coupled with a lot of high rep strength training. So we worked up to like sets of 20 on front squat, sets of 17 on back squat, and then it was just sort of like general sort of like, I think, RDLs, some sumo deadlifts, just sort of a bit of variety, some stuff that I'd not really done before. So that was really good, and I wanted to sort of experiment with this. So I ran a competition 2 weeks into my off season, and with this comp that I ran, I wanted to sort of experiment around with what I did sort of earlier in the season. So earlier in the season I ran my first ever 60 meter race and I went 7.05, and the training cycle that I did, like the 4-week block I did in the run up to running that 7.05, I did absolutely no max velocity sprinting. I just did sort of sled work with 10% of body mass up to sort of distances of 15 meters. So I did like some 10 meters I think for the first 2 weeks, then some 15 meters for the next 2 weeks, and this was sort of like all unplanned, like I wasn't planning to compete, but I ended up competing and I ran that 7.05 just doing that. So I wanted to see if I could kind of replicate those results with these like heavier sleds, but possibly the sleds were too heavy, or maybe it was just sort of like the hype of the first meet that sort of like pushed me through and made me run like a lot better than what I should have. So that was sort of like something that I thought was interesting, something interesting to try at least. But yeah, that was the first sort of training cycle, the first 4-week block. So the first 8 weeks of training in total were sort of just like building my base back up, getting my strength up. So the next 4-week cycle, so weeks 5 through to 8, were basically just getting a bit more specific. So we went with some lighter sled work of 10% body mass over, I think, slightly longer distances up to 30 meters, and the weight room stuff, the reps went down. We went down to sort of like 7, 6, 5 reps, just doing a little more sort of strength focused stuff. And I managed to PR my back squat with 137 kilos, which is 300 pounds at, I think, a body weight of like 61.7. I think it was like 2.2 times body weight, 2.23, something like that. But it's funny, I was actually just talking to my coach on a call just yesterday, and I was sort of like telling him how I could like see the progression of the training each 4-week block, getting like more specific as we go. That's something I really like about John's training, is he has like an element of everything in the training each sort of like cycle. So we're never sort of straying too far away from what the main goal is, but we're sort of like sprinkling in stuff, so we're not like losing the qualities, but we're still kind of like developing stuff. So it's like there'll be more of a focus on like strength for the first like 8 weeks. So that's something I did as well. So all my weight room work for the first 8 weeks of training was done before the sprint stuff. So it would be like a lifting workout first, then I would go out and do my sprints with the heavy sleds and then those lighter sleds. Then as we progressed to getting more specific, we started to do the sprints first to prioritise sort of the neuromuscular aspect of the sprints, because if you kind of lift first, then you're going to kind of like you're going to fatigue sort of the neuromuscular system, and you want to kind of, you know, have that prioritised when you're doing this like higher intensity sprint work. So that was kind of something that was really cool, and something cool to sort of see in the training. So then working into the third 4-week cycle, weeks 9 to 12, we were starting to add in the sprints. So as well, for the first 8 weeks I just really ran on grass, and I did a bit of concrete work with shoes on, but it was mainly just sort of grass that I worked on. This was just to kind of get away from the, you know, intense nature of running on a track year round. I just wanted to kind of like experiment with a little bit of grass work, and I felt like it definitely helped give my body a little bit of rest that it needed. Then I wanted to slowly progress back into running on the track, so I used this like turf field that I found that was like free to use. So I used that for half the week, and I used a track for half the week. So it was like 50% of my sprint volume on the track, 50% on the turf, and I would slowly kind of like phase out the turf so that I would be doing all my work on the track eventually, which you'll sort of like see soon. But with this as well, we start to kind of get more specific during this cycle, so we added these sprints in, and 2 weeks in I ran 2 sprint sessions in, I ran a competition. So it was like this like freshers open meet for university, so my university is like funding some of my competing and my competitions, so I sort of like had to do this meet, and I ran like 7:17, which wasn't too bad considering I'd not really ran much in the way of like max effort sprints for like a few weeks, and having like only done like 2 sprint sessions prior to that, I was quite happy with that. I also experimented around with a little bit of long jump, but I rolled my ankle when long jumping, so that wasn't great. I think it was just like jumping in the sprint spikes and the fact that I've got like a really weak ankle when pronating. So that happened, which wasn't ideal, but it didn't really impact the sprinting much. I was sort of able to get back into sprints like a few days after doing that, and I've not really had much problems with that. One thing I will note though is when I seem to like roll my ankle, it does seem to like tighten my hamstring up a little bit. So it's something that I just have to sort of be cautious of when that happens. But I think there is research that does say that the hamstring and ankle are sort of like linked, so if you like roll your ankle, there's like a much greater chance of like a hamstring injury occurring. So that's maybe something to note. But yeah, so that cycle went really well. The times were starting to look better towards the end of it. I also competed in a weightlifting competition as well, because I had this like goal since 2018 to try and set like a Scottish weightlifting record in one of the like lower weight classes, because I'm like super light and no one that's like my body weight really competes in weightlifting, so I thought it would just be cool to try and do that. So I set the Scottish record in the snatch. I power snatched 73 kilos, which was good enough to set the record in the under 23 61 kilo class. So I did that, and then after that, the next training cycle, we got a bit more specific, adding some fly work in. I think the furthest distance we went up to was like 45 meters, but the times were starting to look good. The main focus was just sort of like technique when I got back into doing just like the like accelerations. I just really wanted to kind of like improve the technique, because I felt that was like an area I could really work on and see some good gains if I managed to kind of improve it. And I definitely did see improvements in times, or I've started to see improvements in times, but it's certainly like a long process, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and I still don't feel like I've fully gotten it down yet. But I feel like definitely just like queuing it in and just sort of like repping it out over time will kind of benefit me in the long run, so it's something I'm going to keep working away at. But yeah, during this training cycle my strength sort of had skyrocketed. I did that 133 ATG double. I definitely had like another rep or two in the tank, I think, as well, because I moved that second rep in 1.64 seconds, which I think was like an average velocity of like 1.4, maybe 1.35 meters per second. So I feel like I could have squatted like 140, between 140 and 150, so like 2.3 to maybe 2.4 times body weight on an ATG back squat is where I sort of feel like my strength was at that point. But yeah, after that 4-week block, I was feeling really good with the sprints, and the second week into the next 4-week block, which I think was week 18, I was planning on competing during this week, and I ran my best ever 40 meter time. So I ran, I think it was like 4.04, and like the times in general and the technique just started to look a lot more fluid and everything looked a lot better. But during this week, so I ran the 40 meters, I think I ran like 4 reps at 40 meters max effort from blocks with a full warm up, then ran some 180 meter reps. I ran 2 like max effort, like sprinting 60, floating 60, sprinting the final 60 with like a few warm up reps to start, and then I ran some walk-in 20s. I think it was 5 times walk-in 20, had a day off, and then I competed on the Sunday. So I just sort of trained through this competition and I ran 7.08, so I was really happy with that. And I feel like I could have ran like a small PB of like 7.04 if I'd had a better reaction and a better warm-up for the second race, because the first one I went 7.1 seconds, and then there was like a 5-6 hour break to the next one, and I didn't know when the next one was going to be on, so it kind of like messed my warm up a little bit, but that's just kind of what happens. But yeah, towards the end of the year I ran my fastest ever 30 meter time with 4.02 in training from first movement, so stuff was looking really good, and I think that was an improvement of 0.18 from the start of the off season. Well, not the start, from I think week 8 or week 9 of the off season to week 20 of the off season. So times were looking good. It was 0.08 up on my best time from the 2022 season, so I was really looking forward to kind of competing and trying to actualize some of these training gains. So the next installment will be my indoor season. I'll sort of like go over just all of the meets in my indoor season and I'll combine that video together, and then after that I'll do sort of the bridge to outdoors, and then I might do like each competition or each outdoor competition as like a training vlog maybe. Not sure how I want to kind of do the videos, so maybe some feedback would be great. I don't know if this video was too long, but I hope everyone enjoyed seeing like what went into my off-season prep. This is obviously like not everything that I did, because if I put every single like training clip that I had from this time, it would literally be like a 1 hour long video of me just like lifting, sprinting, squatting, so I feel like that wouldn't be really interesting. But I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next installment.